Okay, everybody, we'll get started here today. Just a reminder, this is going to be recorded. If anytime there's ever something crazy that we don't need to be put out publicly, please let us know, and we can definitely either edit it out or not share it. Just for a reminder, when we do post these, we're posting them on YouTube as unlisted. So that means they can't be searched, can't be found outside, but we can easily share across the little group that we have here and with people that may not be able to be in attendance today. Today, really neat, we're going to break it into two different discussions. We're going to start off with Anna Cruse. I'll let her introduce herself here in a second, but she's our new assistant here on staff. She's coming to us most recently from the Philadelphia Union of the MLS. She worked with a pretty good colleague of ours, Garrison Draper over there. She's going to talk about environmental impacts on performance, especially as it pertains to cold weather. And then we're going to kick it over to Nick Yonko from Performance Nutrition, and he's going to hit us with some information with hydration and supplements. So Anna, I'll kick it over to you. And one final reminder is we'll always use this as a platform to come together and talk about performance, but we always want to be positive in everything that we do on here. There's no negativity on this call at all. So Anna, I'll let you take it.
Thanks, Nelly. Like Nelly said, I was most recently at the Philadelphia Union. I worked a lot with environmental impacts and how they sort of influence the difficulty of a match setting. So that's what I focused on there. And then prior to that, I got my master's degree at Temple University in exercise physiology and was also a rowing coach there. So have a bit of experience with cold weather and how it impacts athletes and sort of what the messaging that we tried to give to our athletes there, but then just some general impacts of cold and how it does impact performance. So that's sort of what we'll start off with. So the cold weather is impending, like we saw on Monday and Tuesday. It was pretty chilly here. So we're just going to touch on the impacts of cold on performance, and then just how to prepare, some pretty common sense things, but always a good thing to remind ourselves so that we can remind our athletes about how to deal with and handle cold weather. So cold impacts performance in a lot of ways physiologically. Probably the biggest way that it impacts it is with the respiratory system. So as the air starts to cool, we see a decrease in humidity, and then we have, when we're exercising or in a training session or a game, pretty high respiratory rates typically. And so those two things collectively can cause airway dryness in our airways to our lungs. So because of that, we see an inflammatory response in the airways. And so as you can see in the picture, the purple is what a normal airway would look like. So that's a lot of oxygen going to the blood, a lot of oxygen going to your muscles. But in a cold setting, we see that it narrows a little bit. So any athletes who have exercise-induced asthma are probably going to see a little bit higher symptom with the cold than others, but anyone can experience it. So, and just because the airways are narrowed, we see a decrease in oxygen consumption per breath. So we're not able to bring in as much oxygen to the body to get to those working muscles as we would in a normal temperature. So that's sort of what's happening, what's going on while you're working out. In addition to that, there may be a longer recovery period to regain that respiratory function, the normal respiratory function. So if you've ever worked out in really cold weather, sometimes you notice that it's harder to breathe later on in the day, or you have a cough that was associated with it. Those are things that can happen because of the cold. So the next part of the body that cold impacts is just your overall body temperature and skin. So whenever it's cold, we see a decrease in body temperature and temperature of major muscle groups. So like I said, in the respiratory system, the airways are narrowed, so less oxygen is coming into the body per breath. So we do see a little bit of a decrease in VO2 max. And then in addition to that, with the colder muscle groups, we see a reduction in peak power and then a reduction in dynamic movement. So things like sprinting or really quick movements. the caveat here is that we can sort of mitigate these with warming up and making sure that our athletes have the right amount of layers on and things like that. So they shouldn't be detrimental to performance, but it's good to note that these are things happening physiologically when we're in a cold like circumstance. Just want to mention hypothermia because it can happen. It's going to happen in extreme conditions where it's probably precipitating or things like that. But if we're seeing a really big drop in body temperature, so the body temperature is going to sit right around 95 degrees during that's sort of the indicator for hypothermia. We're going to see warning signs like really excessive shivering, loss of motor skills, and then difficulty speaking. That jaw will sort of lock up a little bit. But your athletic trainers, I'm sure, are fully trained in this, and so they'll be able to help in those situations. But just wanted to add that as a little bit of a caveat. And then obviously, anytime skin's exposed in extreme temperatures, there is the risk of frostbite, but that's probably going to be in their more extreme high wind chill circumstances. So just to keep that in the back of your mind. And then lastly, there's the potential that injury risk is increased, the decreased body temperature and decreased temperature of the muscle groups make them tighter. It's more difficult to elongate the muscle. So we want to make sure that we're giving ourselves enough time to reach those normal levels of range of motion. So when that muscle fiber is shortened, we're not going to have the same amount of range of motion. And that's going to lead to those lower peak power measures and lower functioning of the sprinting type movements. And then our blood flow is sort of reallocated to keep our core and our organs warm. So we do see a little bit less blood flow to our extremities, which is going to reduce the amount of oxygen that can go to those muscles. And then just generally heart rate remains lower at lower environmental temperatures. So that also means less blood to our working muscles. The good news is we can mitigate all of these things with a warm up. So we can talk about that in a second. So those are sort of our main impacts of cold on performance. So this is just a refresher about how to prepare for cold conditions. Pretty common sense, like I said. So just going to breeze through these, but we want to make sure our athletes are dressed for success. And as coaches, we're dressed for success on the sidelines. So too much clothing is always better than too little. We can always take layers off. We probably want to start the warm up in more layers than we're going to play the game in. So that's just a good rule of thumb. And then we want to have minimal skin exposure if we are hitting really cold conditions. We want to reduce the risk of frostbite. So gloves all the way head to ankle coverage. Again, we can always take things off as athletes warm up. So we want to stay away from cotton. That's just going to pull moisture in and it's just going to sit there on the skin. So as soon as the athlete stops moving, they're going to get cold really, really fast. So we want a base layer that wicks sweat. Pretty easy with our lovely Nike sponsor here. We should have a lot of resources about how we can dress for cold. And then just good rule of thumb to have extra clothing on the sidelines when we're subbing in and out. We want to be prepared for that. So we're going to move on to making sure that we have the proper warm up. So cooler core muscle temperatures. We want to make sure that we give them time to warm up from that cold state to our normally warm state. So the warm up may have to be slightly elongated. We definitely want to make sure the build to our top speeds and quick movements is really gradual. We don't want to hit those maybe as soon as we would on a 90-degree day. So making sure that we're keeping that in the back of our mind when we're warming up. And then in terms of when we end the warm up and start the competition or start the practice, we want to keep that time short. So we don't have to be sprinting all the way up to it, but making sure that your athletes are moving around. We're not standing still and cooling down before we have to go and do high speed movements. And then just a continuation of the warm up, we want to maintain readiness between our efforts. So whether that's keeping athletes warm on the sidelines in between, if you're subbing in and out, making sure they have coats and layers to put on while they're sitting there, or if we're doing a conditioning session, making sure that we are still moving, even if it's low level movement between reps, so that we're not getting cold instantly when we stop, especially if it's raining and cold together. And then just as coaches being cognizant of when athletes are stopping and when they're starting again, and making sure that you're communicating with players that about when they're going to sub back in. So we give everybody the right amount of time so that they can be warm as they hit the field or court or whatever sort of circumstance you're in. And then I think in cold temperatures, it's pretty easy as an athlete, especially to forget to hydrate. We're not getting as hot, we're not getting as thirsty as we would on a 90-degree day with 80% humidity. So making sure that we're just maintaining normal hydration levels. I'm sure Nick will sort of hit on hydration a lot more in his talk today. So I'll let him take the reins on that one, but it's just good to keep in mind encouraging hydration throughout practice, even when it's cold. And then the last consideration, other considerations, this is the last point, but just making sure that if it says 50 degrees and the wind is 20 miles an hour, that could reduce that temperature to 35 degrees. So making sure you're looking at the wind chill and the real feel when you're sort of giving athletes guidelines about what they should wear to practice or things they need to bring to a game. And then precipitation is always going to exacerbate the temperature and how cold it is for athletes, especially when they stop. So rain and snow are clothing is going to get wet, hair is going to get wet, bodies are going to be damp. And so that makes it, the body will cool off a lot faster in those conditions. And then just in terms of players on the roster, there's a lot of different body compositions that we all deal with. So just knowing that athletes who are really, really lean are going to probably experience more, they're going to be more susceptible to the cold than athletes with a higher body fat composition. So just keeping that in the back of your mind, these are all considerations. I'm sure that we're all pretty aware of how to deal with the cold, but it's always a good reminder as it comes, so our athletes are prepared for it. And then these are just some references if you want to dig a little bit deeper into research about cold and how it affects the body, feel free to do so. And then I'm available to answer any questions. Our whole staff here in Applied Health and Performance Science is always available to answer any questions you have about temperature, environment, or anything related to performance. So I think now I'm going to kick it over to Nick. If I'll stop sharing my screen and then.
What we'll do, as we get to the end of this, we'll couple all the questions or anything that we may like to dig into deeper, and we'll couple them both together just out of respect to everybody's time. But that was really good. Thank you, Anna.
Mm-hmm.
Everybody can see that all right? Excellent. So yes, Anna, as you said, I'm going to pick up on the hydration piece, and I kind of called a quick little audible when I saw what Anna was going to talk about and how it relates to the cold. And so I'm really just going to stick to the hydration this time, which means I'm going to have to hopefully be asked back at some point to talk about supplements. But the role that water plays in the body is so important. And when we talk about nutrition and things like that, we always want the sexy new thing on the market, like what's the cool thing on Instagram or what's that's going to make us perform better in that. When in reality, it always comes back to the least sexy, the most boring water. We are made up of somewhere around 60 to 75% water. And if we're not getting in fluids consistently, you can see the impact that it can play on us as just a individual with transporting nutrients and oxygen throughout the body to how does it impair and improve performance? Can it promote recovery, impede exhaustion, and those types of things? So while we love to have the newest, latest, and greatest, I think it always comes back to that baseline. Are we getting in enough water? So what are the recommendations? We've always heard, I bet you guys can all remember, like the drink 8 ounces, 8 cups a day. Well, that's kind of good, but it was never really based in any sort of science around individuals. And so it was great to say because it was 8 by 8, makes a lot of sense. And it was easy for us to remember. But we like to expand it a little bit further and really look at the individual. And individuals need somewhere between a half an ounce to a full ounce for every pound you weigh. Now think about that from a cross-country athlete to some of our linemen, what that could look like in a day and how that might have to be achieved. So for example, we use this, if you weigh 200 pounds, you're looking at somewhere between 100 and 200 ounces of fluids a day. Now, if you guys quickly think, how many ounces have you gotten in the last day or two? You might not even be able to give even remotely a close answer, right? Even more so what's happening lately with our masks on, we're not drinking as much. We might be sitting behind our computers a little bit more. I know at least in Lash, every time I walk down the hall, I walk by a water fountain. And one of my tips or tricks is every time I pass a water fountain, I try to drink for 10 seconds. So a lot of those environmental cues might not be where we're at now that we're sitting behind our desks from home and things like that. And then what are our athletes doing? We know a lot of our athletes are stuck inside. They're sitting in their dorms or in their apartments, not really getting out and doing a lot of things. So being cognizant of just how much are you getting? And then how do we get it? Water doesn't come from just water, right? It can come from other beverages, Gatorades, teas, soups. I think soups are super awesome to have and get quite a bit of fluids in, but they also come from fruits and vegetables, right? We know that watermelon's mostly water, oranges, things like that, where broccoli, not so much. If anybody's ever tried to juice broccoli, right? Maybe I'm the only one. You're not getting a lot of juice out of that, but it's still there. So you've kind of got to equate all of that in there, but we just don't want food to make up the bulk of that. We want the bulk to still come from our liquids. And the different size bottles that we may have around us, right? So the typical bottle that you might buy from the grocery store, hopefully we're not, because we like to save the planet as well, is around 16 ounces. The green bottles you see all the athletes carrying around are 32 ounces. There's the Nalgene's out there that I know a lot of people like to carry around. Those are also about 32 ounces, although those come in different sizes. And then your milk jug, which is around 128 ounces. So I'm sure you've even seen some of the athletes or some of our musclehead gym guys walking around the gym carrying their big jugs to make sure they're getting their fluids in. But then are you hydrated? How do we know if we're hydrated? I think this is actually one of the more fascinating things, that we can survive multiple days without food, right? We know that if we were in the desert or we were stranded, we could go several days without consuming anything and survive. But it's very different when it comes to fluids. We start to perish very quickly, and it would last maybe 2 to 3 days without fluids where we're going to get in very critical conditions. But we don't have a great way of monitoring our hydration. There's no little like the glucose monitors for diabetes where you just prick your finger and you can take a quick test and know if you're hydrated or not. So we have these other tools out there that aren't great, but they're a good way when you use them in combination, will help you and the athletes decide how hydrated are you. You have the classic urine color chart, right? We've all heard potentially that, lemonade yellow to clear, it lets you know that you're hydrated. I like to also pair that with how often are you using the restroom, right? If you haven't used the restroom for several hours, that's an indicator that you're not getting in enough fluids. But you also don't want to be maybe going to the bathroom every 30 minutes either. That means you're probably overdoing it a little bit. So I like to think about every 2 to 3 hours you should be using the restroom. And then you want to just check for some dehydration symptoms. If any of you guys gotten headaches, any of the athletes coming to the field with headaches, that could easily be because they're dehydrated. Are you thirsty? Are you paying attention to your thirst signals? And then when we start to pair that in with performance, we always think, well, man, I didn't get enough fluids today. Let me just chug my bottle of water real quick. That's not the best way to get hydrated. You actually probably needing to start hydrate 3 to 4 days prior to competition. But what happens for a lot of our athletes? We may compete on Sunday, and then we got to turn around and compete again on Friday. So do we ever really get to take our foot off the hydration battle? Not really. Because if we're planning 3 to 4 days out, right when we finish our competition, we're rehydrating. And then we automatically have to start thinking about when is our next competition and should we already be preparing for that next one? And then of course we want to, top off any hydration 2 to 4 hours before a competition, and then really lay off any sort of fluids the closer we get to competition, because we don't want to go in with water sloshing around in our stomach. Lots of times that's undesirable, and a lot of people may throw up, and their performance actually declines a little bit because of all that happening. So what are some ways that we can help ourselves and our athletes? Set hydration reminders. How often are we hydrating in practice? How often are we hydrating throughout the day? We've got all the fancy phones and all the fancy watches. I know we can set up reminders. There's apps. There's this plant nanny where you actually have to take care of a plant. If you don't hydrate your plant enough throughout the day, it will die. I know some teams have gotten on board with that to see who can keep their plant alive the longest. I thought that was a fun way to do it. There are even bottles out there with time notches throughout the day that says like 7 a.m., 9 a.m., 11 a.m., noon, like where are you throughout the day as you drink those. But most importantly, just kind of hold each other accountable. During activity, we really like to think about thirst, but thirst isn't always our best indicator that we need fluids. Increased hydration comes with the more you sweat, the temperatures outside, what is your body heat, what's going on there. And then we got to adjust for climate, duration of activity, what's the clothing are you wearing? We just talked about that a little bit. If you have more layers on. And one of the questions I always like to ask is, do we need more fluids in colder climates or warmer climates? A lot of the time the answer is they're the same, but we just don't have those physiological cues of potentially heavy sweating in the summer months where our clothes are soaked with fluids, because as soon as you sweat in the cold, it evaporates. So we might not see as much of those sweat beads on our heads, and our clothes might not be getting as sweaty. And so some of those other cues that would tell us to drink might not be there. But every time you breathe in the cold, what do you see? You see your breath. That's evaporation of fluids coming out of your breath. So you got to remember that you're still perspiring as much. You're just not getting those same cues as you might during the winter months as you do the summer months. You do need to be aware of overhydration. That can occur. It's less likely, but you do need to kind of have that. A lot of that has to play into like sodium levels and all types of stuff like that. Likely you'll feel sore, something like that, joggling, like that discomfort. And it can also impact performance. Being overhydrated and dehydration has similar effects to performance. We just don't talk about it as much as we do dehydration. I can kind of talk about this real quick. I don't want to take up too much time. We can kind of come back to here if there's any other questions about that. But it's one thing to know, okay, if I weigh 150 pounds, let's say for me, I need to drink 150 ounces of water that day. Well, what if I lose 4 pounds in practice? I didn't lose 4 pounds of mass. I lost 4 pounds of water weight. So now I need to start calculating and thinking, well, how much water do I need to drink to replace that 4 pounds of fluids that I lost, in addition to the 150 ounces that I need to drink just on a daily basis, okay? So for every pound lost, you should be consuming somewhere between 16 and 24 ounces of fluids to replace that pound. So if I lose 4 pounds, I'm about 24 ounces. I need to drink another 100 ounces in addition to my 150. So I am now up to somewhere near 250 ounces in my day. The goal, though, would be to not lose 4 pounds at practice. So am I hydrating enough in practice? Am I getting enough salty food before practice to help to retain fluids? Those are all questions we can ask and think about. The reason we want to monitor and pay attention to how much we're losing in practice, because there's not a lot that the nutrition world may agree upon, right? We've got keto diet over here. We've got the grapefruit diet. We've got lemon water, detox teas. We're kind of all over the place. High carbohydrate, low carbohydrate, high protein, like we're kind of a little bit all over the place. The one thing that we pretty much all agree upon is that if you lose 2% of your body weight during a training session, performance starts to drop off a cliff. So what is the athlete or your 2% threshold? Multiply your weight by 0.02 to get that answer. So if I weigh 200 pounds, my threshold would be that 4-pound weight loss. That's not a lot of weight to lose in a practice. It's typical at a lot of basketball, soccer, football, for athletes to lose up in excess of 8 pounds a practice. So it's not uncommon for people to lose 4 pounds. And again, as you weigh a little bit less, that threshold drops. But we don't even want to get close to that. This is just a quick look at, again, how did I calculate? And this isn't a thing where more is better. 24 is really that ceiling of ounces per pound you want to consume. I like to use the high end when I'm talking with the kids, because if they miss short, they're going to miss short into my range of 16 to 24. But if I tell the kids to drink 16 ounces per pound and they miss short, we're going to miss short overall. So I always like to be a little bit on the aggressive side, knowing that they might not get that full 96 or 100 ounces afterwards. It's kind of a trick. And that is pretty much it. I feel like I sped right through that. So I'll stick around and answer any questions, but yeah, really at the end of the day, hydration is awesome. It can absolutely help with performance, can help with your everyday feelings, grogginess, headaches, tiredness, all that type of stuff. So I think hydration is one of the most underrated things that can help us on a day-to-day basis and help performance.
That's awesome. I appreciate you sharing that, Nick. Both you and Anna, thank you guys for joining us. So what we'll typically do here, just like always, we'll stop it at 30 minutes. If people need to go, you definitely can. Then we'll leave it open to questions if Nick and Anna, you guys have time. Before everybody leaves, I do want to endorse the next two that we have coming up. It's going to be November 18th, and then the next one is December 2nd. November 18th, we have John Wagle from the Kansas City Royals organization. He runs their performance structure from all their affiliates all the way up to the parent club. His big area of research is eccentric hamstring development, but he has a pretty wide breadth of knowledge as it pertains to performance structures. And he's a strength coach and a on-field coach. So he'll give us some unique perspective there. And then still working on our guest that will be speaking and headlining the December 2nd. So if anybody's interested in talking or have someone that they'd be interested in bringing on, please help me out and just send it my way. Next time, I would like to challenge everybody to bring a friend, whether they've been here before or have not, but we'd like to increase our attendance here every single time we go. But really appreciate everybody coming. We'll post this and send the link out so you can review this moving forward. But please stick around if you have time, and we'll ask Nick and Anna any questions you may have. Thank you, guys. Does anyone have any specific questions?
I like to geek out over water. Don't be afraid.
Nick, I have a couple questions. So can you talk a little bit about, so when you, let's say it's a hot environment and we've all talked about and thought about prescribing, salty foods to be able to retain fluids a little bit more. How does that impact athletes? If I retain water in a hot environment, does that impact sweating? Does that then bring my core temperature up?
I'm not 100% sure about like how the core temperature responds to that, but anytime you have sodium with water, it will help you from sweating out as much because sodium loves to hold on. They're like buddies in your system. They don't want to let go of the fluids. And so if you have a good combination of both, likely, and that goes back to the how much weight are you losing in practice, that can be mitigated by adding things in like salt, magnesium, and that type of stuff that where it'll hold in, because you don't want to lose anywhere near that 4 pounds. And so during those months where you might sweat more due to the environment, yeah, we want to make sure that we're adding extra, again, salty pretzels, adding extra salt on our foods, things like that. So it'll help retain fluids and or help get our fluids up that if we do lose the 4 pounds, it's not as damaging, or 2 pounds, whatever that may be in that threshold. But that's what that really sodium is kind of for, is to help hold those fluids in. But physiologically, if you're a heavy sweater, you're a heavy sweater regardless of where and what environment you're in. It just might be exacerbated a little bit by the environment.
Gotcha.
I don't know if that helped with the core temperature. That'd be a fascinating one. I do know that there was a study out of Australia. I got to go look for it. But they used slush for the hot environment, and they would have their, I think the group would take the slush, the slurry, and it would drop core temperature and would improve performance overall. I think in an RPE rating, they perceived that they weren't exhausted compared to a non-control group or the control group. I'll have to go find that though. It was something I thought about using with the baseball team, with the pitchers in those summer months as we got closer to, May, June, getting those guys to bring their core temperature down a little bit. So that's a fascinating area to think about.
Yeah, I like that a lot.
Nick, do you, back to the sodium, do you recommend, like I see a lot of the supplements like Liquid IV or like the Noon hydration tablets, anything like that. And I don't know, they always seem kind of gimmicky to me, but do you recommend anything like that?
I don't out of the gate. There are some things that are more potent than others. And it's really just the content, how much is in the product and what are they trying to sell you. Now the Liquid IV, I've got a great handout. I could actually send to Josh and he can blast it out. That shows the content of like Crystal Light, Mio, Liquid IV, Gatorade pouches, and I believe some other ones, and the cost for what you're actually getting. And it's quite fascinating how expensive some of these things are when all you need to do is put some lemon in water or some strawberries in your water and then add like a tiny little bit of sodium, which costs like less than a cent. But I do know that they provide flavor. And if that flavor is going to help anyone drink more, I'm 100% behind it. And at the end of the day, the Liquid IVs and those things don't cost a ton. But I don't know if they're helping as much with the sodium in the extreme cases for like cramping and those that need to retain a lot of those fluids. But we do have a product that we use. It's called the Right Stuff. I've been using it for the last 7-8 years, and it's like, so the average or the recommended dose of sodium for an adult is around 2,000 milligrams. This has like, I want to say it has 2,500 milligrams in the pouch itself. It's extreme, but it's needed for those heavy sweaters, those extreme circumstances. I don't think anyone just a day-to-day would need it, but in an athletic environment, that might be necessary. But something like a couple hundred milligrams is usually pretty good.
What was the daily recommended sodium intake you said? Was it
Around
2,000?
2,000 milligrams for an adult. You may see some organizations say like 2,500. But we get that really easily. Don't feel like you got to go out and like make a stretch to do that. Like a can of soup already has probably in the thousands, like probably 1,200. So most everything has plenty of sodium.
Going back to, we have some softball coaches on staff here. So thinking back to, let's say you have, so softball, baseball, we compete in series across a weekend. I had a guy one time in Texas, heavy sweater, always had like white all over him. You could tell he was very losing a ton of salt. Okay, so he was really addicted. Not, I don't want to say addicted, bad word, but he was all about right stuff. And my concern was when we play 3-4 games a weekend, how much is too much for a guy like that? Do you have any reservations about something like that when you use it every day?
Not with the younger population. Again, the recommendations for adult is at 2,000 milligrams, but that's again for kind of like that heart health, blood pressure, and those types of things. When we're really talking about this younger population and athletes who are fit and sweating a ton, especially if you're seeing those salt rings around the brim of their hats and on their jerseys, we definitely can utilize a few of those across the day without any sort of negative side effects because they're pouring out so much fluids and so much salt. If it was a pitcher who was playing on Friday night and then probably not pitching the rest of the weekend and you just saw him in the dugout guzzling a little bit of TRS, I'd say like, well, we kind of probably want to pull that back a little bit. But I know that for a lot of the field players that are out there on a daily basis throughout, a bunch of innings, yeah, having that even twice a day if needed. I've had some athletes take one before the game and then we'll take one. I see this a lot with the soccer players, like around that 80th minute, if I can get them to chug one as they're running by the sidelines or they come out for a minute, just because they would sweat 7-8 pounds a game. I do everything I can. So it really is individual though. And it would take really probably Kayla and I sitting with that athlete and figuring it out. But in those extreme cases, yeah, load them up.
That's awesome.
Okay, I guess I have a question, and I don't know if this is like a myth or not. So we fly, obviously, and I know you work with baseball, and flying dehydrates you, correct?
It does.
Okay,
Yes.
so something like, what is your recommendation? Because I know you said we need to prepare like 3 or 4 days before a competition, but it's probably even more with having to fly, right?
Yep.
Okay, and then to add to it, it's normally because we're flying from cold weather. So while we're drinking here, prepping for practice, it is cold here. We're also flying to a warmer climate.
Yeah. So, okay. So first question, the flight, 8 ounces for every hour you're in the air.
Awesome.
Problem is half of your team's asleep. Right.
No, not this year. I'll make sure I'm walking down the aisles, bumping their heads, wake up, drink water. Mandatory water bottle drinking time right now.
They all get bummed out when I end up on the flights because they know that I'm not going to really let them sleep or I'm going to wake them up. But yes, ideally, like on those shorter flights, you could probably get, that last 8 ounces before you get on the plane. But for those longer ones where you're going to definitely be on the plane for a considerable amount of time, especially if you're going, international and you're going to be on the flight for quite a long time, they really talk about making sure, again, I'm sure Josh and Anna can speak to this, and John, about getting up and stretching and like the compression tights and things like that. But yeah, really getting them to drink fluids while they're on the plane. But it's 8 ounces for every hour. And you can just Google how long is the flight. And usually I like to do that and put that on the itinerary so they get an idea. But you can kind of preload that if you'd like.
Yeah, we'll definitely put it on the itineraries this year.
Yeah.
It'll be the headline.
Yeah.
On this flight, 3 hours.
Just don't take the fluids through the check. Get your fluids after the gate or the security.
It's a good note. I'll make sure.
Otherwise, you're throwing away a lot of water, bottled beverages. And then when you're going from cold environment to hot environment, that is definitely something you want to prepare for. If you know you're going from, let's say State College to Alabama for a game, and it's definitely, 20, 30 degrees warmer there, humidity, we want to pay attention to that. So for example, let's say I do better with 0.7 ounces for every pound I weigh. So I'm kind of somewhere in the middle of the 0.5 and the 1. Knowing I'm about to go to Alabama to play a series, I may up my intake to closer to that 1, the 3 to 4 days leading prior, to just kind of give myself that buffer. What you would want to avoid is showing up to the site and then trying to make up for it the day of. You can't make up hydration within a couple hours. It takes time. Metabolically, it takes time to digest and the cells to uptake fluids and get into the muscle and all that stuff. So you can't be sitting there like, uh-oh, the national anthem's playing, I'm sweating, let me chug that bottle. It will not take effect immediately. So that's why that 3 to 4 days prior. So you would just want to start to practice. You may even go a week in advance, because if I'm not used to drinking more, I may start going to the bathroom more. And so I may have to get my body adjusted to that. So it may actually take longer than that if I'm going to have to significantly increase my fluids. Like, I wouldn't recommend anybody going out tomorrow if you've been only drinking like 40 to 50 ounces and jumping that up to 150 tomorrow. It would be a lot on the system. Gradually increase over time.
Awesome. Thank you.
Of course.
I have a question for probably the group. It's directed at Anna, but so historically, and I'm generalizing quite a bit here, but historically as coaches, we have always, not always, recently embraced hot weather very, very much, in that we take breaks at practice. We have hydration breaks. We plan for heat. There's mitigation plans in place if somebody has some catastrophic problem, but in the cold, maybe not so much. So especially in certain sports, it's really easy for us as coaches to be like, hey, suck it up. It's not cold. You can handle it, handle it. You got to be tough, whatever. How is there a difference between treating hot, and aside from the catastrophic effects that like a heat stroke can have, but we allow our athletes breaks during the heat to perform, but we really try to build toughness in the cold. But we're talking about performance. You still got to win. So how do you manage those two? Is that just a global issue we have as coaches? Where, because I'm the biggest at risk. I would go out to practice all the time with shorts, and I just got to be tough. But like, where's that? And Carl, I see you shaking your head. Maybe you can weigh in here. How does that come into effect?
Yeah, no, I don't know from a science perspective on that. That's a little bit outside of my wheelhouse, but just from, personal experiences, what I'm trying to equate it to my time in the Army, where the weather is the uncontrollable and you got to figure out different ways to manage it. The biggest issues that we always had was the hydration piece, because people don't think they need to drink while they're cold, right? And they absolutely need to. Just like they don't think they need to drink water while they're studying, but their brain is burning water. So you got to do that too. I think one of the things that's a little bit different with the heat is, heat versus the cold, is in the cold, as you move, your body is moving towards a healthier temperature. Whereas in the heat, as you move, your body's actually moving towards an unhealthier temperature, right? And so regulating that is a little bit different. Like for us, and this is very different from like a soccer game or something, but we would always start out every patrol, every movement, every road march cold, because we knew we were going to start generating a ton of heat, and then we didn't put on anything to trap the heat until, like an outer layer or whatever, until we stopped. Because that's the point at which we're trying to retain the heat inside. But if we're playing a game or something, I would totally get the idea that you want to make sure that you're relatively warm as you're starting, so they don't create an issue for muscles. But at some point, peel layers and then the hydration piece and then being able to put layers back on when you're trying to retain the heat that you built up. Yeah, the biggest issue that we always saw, that's the threat, would have been something like chilblains, frost nip, frostbite, those types of things. And those are less likely when you're moving a lot, unless you have a high wind situation. So that's factoring in, you know, the rain, the wind, the temperature, and the activity level, and the fact that not everybody's moving at the same rate. Those are all things that, just like you have to worry about it on the heat end of it, you got to worry about it on the cold end of it. I just think at the end of the day, it's the idea that when you're moving towards a healthier temperature, which is not the same in hot weather.
Yeah, that makes a lot of sense.
Okay, sorry, and one last question, Nick. What time or how many hours before you go to bed do you recommend to stop drinking water? Because obviously we'll place curfews on athletes when we travel and all that stuff, and even for them to just start getting used to it, when do they need to stop drinking water for them to get good rest?
There is no great answer to that. I don't know if there's anything that is leading me towards that. What I would say, it's going to be very individualized. I'm genuinely, personally, I'm drinking water 10 seconds before I'm falling asleep, and I'm drinking like a healthy amount, right? Like probably somewhere between 16 and 24 ounces before I fall asleep. But you also don't want to fall asleep and have any sort of bladder issues and then have to wake up multiple times throughout the night. So it has to be a balance, because I don't want to disrupt sleep either. If you're doing a really good job of consistently hydrating throughout the day, which is the goal, chances are as you get closer to sleep, you're only going to need a handful of ounces that will not disrupt that sleep. So at that point, it's an individualized practice, and to practice in advance. But there is no set like time to stop.
Awesome, thank you.
Yeah.
I promise to stay on mute. I appreciate it.
No, you're good. Like I said, I love to geek out about water. It's good.
No, I haven't asked one, so I don't promise to stay muted for this one. But so I'm thinking of, we're warming up and we're playing in state college and it's 40 degrees. Just trying to get through the pregame aspect of, you're spending 90 minutes to maybe 110 minutes getting ready for a game that's going to be played in 40 degrees. Yet we hit inside at our facility. So just trying to figure out the best way to allow them to get up to the core temperature that we're looking for, but also is that where we start warming up with a little bit less layer to where we go inside, and then we're going to add the layers after the first 40, 50 minutes of warming up where we're inside, and the layers go on right before we start playing. Recommendations for that, and how do we put them in the best situation to work towards that healthy body temperature that we're going to be out there for probably 2 hours.
So you're starting outside, going inside, and going back outside? Am I
Correct.
understanding that correctly? Okay.
Well, yeah.
Sometimes.
I think, I guess the biggest transition is going to be from going inside to outside, because you don't want, once the core body temperature is at the level you want it to be at your game ready, when you go back outside, if you're in clothes that are even remotely sweaty and you're not moving, that core temperature is going to drop very quickly. So making sure that when you head back outside, that there are layers, whether that's like a parka or whatever that you can put on when you're in like the dugout or when you're not moving around. I think that's probably a big thing in softball, because you're not running around on the field the whole time. There is a lot of time where you are sitting, waiting for your moment. So I think that is where having the layers ready to put on is really crucial, especially when you're going from that indoor to outdoor. And I think you can start in the layers outside as well. We don't want to have wet layers, I guess. That would be a concern as well. But we don't want athletes to be like shivering before they start. But yeah, it's good to keep in mind that as they start moving around, they will warm up, layers will come off. So maybe, yeah, I hope that answers the question. But just, I think there the emphasis is like, make sure we have something to put on to keep us warm in between our bouts of movement. Does that make sense?
It
So
does.
possibly changing into dry clothes after we hit inside.
So
Would that be
yeah,
smart?
so in my head, kind of what I'm thinking is, we go outside for 30 minutes of getting loose, stretching and starting to move and throw and things like that, where there's a sweatshirt on, something over the top, but no thermal layer underneath. Then it's go inside where we can hit in our t-shirt where our body can start to move and we might get a little sweaty then. But then immediately before we go back outside, now the thermal layer goes on to help keep that core temperature where we want it, so that when they get outside, because they're going to be out there for probably 35, 40 minutes before we start the game finally, then they can keep that up. The thermal will keep them warm, but it's dry, and it's going to prepare them for the day and to try to keep them as comfortable per se before we get moving into the game.
Yeah, that's great. Yeah, just the layer closest to the body is the one you want to keep dry if you can before you're going to be sitting for a long amount of time. And like, I don't know if there's an opportunity to do this, but just like keep in mind the sports bras will get wet when they get sweaty, and like the thick band on the bottom is gonna stay wet for a long time. So that can be a source of chilling really quickly as well. So when you're thinking about that thermal base layer, that's awesome, but make sure that you keep in mind the sports bra as well, because that can cool you so quickly. So I don't know if that's feasible at all, but that might be a good measure as well. I don't know if that's just going.
We're gonna have to make it feasible because weather will not be an issue.
Yeah.
That's
But I
also, no, thank you. We do. That's something that I've never done as an athlete or even as a coach, to think to like change them into dry clothes before we head outside, because more times than not, our hitting warm up is indoors. It gets hot. Everybody's sweating in there. Even if you're not even swinging, it just gets warm because, the building's just warm. So definitely probably something we will work into our
Yeah, we're going to have to
pregame
adjust
timeline.
how we do that,
Yeah, itinerary,
especially
seriously.
because, you'll have been outside for 35 minutes. So as soon as you get inside, that body is still trying to react to the cold weather. So it heats up. So once you get inside for 10 minutes, you get really hot quickly because it's still trying to catch up from being 35 degrees outside.
It may almost be like you treat it like a double header where you flip jerseys.
Yeah.
In
No,
between.
that's really good. Thank you very
Most
much.
importantly, the base layer for us,
Yeah.
for girls.
Yeah, that's a
the
great
very
point.
base layer.
And I mean, I never would have thought of the sports bra, but yeah, that makes sense.
It's because you're a guy, Coach
I
T.
get it. I get it.
You don't have to think about that stuff.
All right, so we'll stay on here too, but this kind of brings up a conversation. So there's sometimes kits that we can travel with. So first thing that comes to mind when you're in like some nasty weather is Vaseline can be a really good product to put on exposed skin. Certain sports they're not able to wear layers, so they wear no sleeves, but they put Vaseline on any exposed skin. That helps with wind, and it acts as as a layer. This may not hold true for all sports, especially for like throwing sports that you have to use your hand, but rubber gloves under gloves help there too for heat. We've used heated blankets in a dugout and a sideline. You just throw them on the bench. So if you don't have a heated bench, that's your portable heated bench. Lotion also works for Vaseline. Are there any other hacks like that anybody's used that we could put in the notes?
Yeah, the warmers that you can buy at like the gas station, where they're like, you shake them, you open them and then they get warm. You can also get the ones that go on your feet. They don't really restrict your movement in your shoes either, especially if there's not a ton of movement happening. So, but just good to also just slip in the pockets of your jacket. So
Yeah, I like that.
You could
Has anyone
do.
ever tried? Oh, go ahead, Nick.
I was gonna say you could try to avoid like just ice cold fluids, right? Anything. Sometimes we've even put just warm water in like the little pitchers that you can use as opposed to the ice cold water. And then if you've got like that double header where body temperatures are low, having like a hot chocolate or a a tea that they can use in between games to again keep that body temperature warm has been used in the past.
I know a couple of years ago when we had that significant delay with football against Michigan State, Kayla had them go get chicken broth, and we were getting a combination of some sodium and a little bit of the protein, and then the warm water in there. One thing Those hand warmer, toe warmer things are really awesome. As a skier, I use the toe warmers a lot, and I found that putting them across the top of the toes versus the bottom of the toes is way more comfortable, and it doesn't restrict movement nearly as much. And Nelly, on the rubber gloves, inside gloves, works super well for trapping the heat in there. You got to periodically get them off because the skin will actually can become compromised because it gets all wrinkly and super soft because the moisture has nowhere to go in there. So being able to like shake that out a few times or turn them inside out or something like that can be helpful.
Good call. Good call. And you said that's a really great call. You said put the foot warmers on top. Is that what you?
Yeah, you put them across the top of the toes. When you put them underneath, you get a higher chance of having some kind of a hot spot or a blister because it gets in the way of the foot's natural movement. But they flex enough that when it's on top, you don't have any foreign object underneath your toes, so to speak.
Yeah, I like it. Awesome. This was a good conversation, guys. I really appreciate it. Anybody have any other questions or thoughts?
I've never used them, but there is a company that I keep seeing called Frost Gear that just came out with extreme cold weather throwing gloves for baseball and softball. If you have one of those athletes that potentially has difficulty keeping their hands warm where they can, make throws and things like that. I haven't tried them. We'll probably buy a pair here soon to see if they're just a fad or, just a worthless product, but it's something that just came out.
Yeah. That's awesome.
Hey, Nelly, I got to jump off for another meeting. Thank you, everybody.
Yes, sir. Carl, thanks
Dr.
always, man. Thanks a ton. All right, guys. Well, if there's anything else, we'll stay on. If not, we'll wrap it up.
And last scrimmage of the year today. You should come out to the softball field. Come to Nittany Lion Park. Come on, girl.
What time is it at?
We start at 4:30, but we don't start
Ready to
playing
go.
until 5:30 because
Okay.
we're gonna warm up first. It's
Okay.
beautiful out here.
Sounds good.
Yeah, you're coming out on a good day. It's 60s, mid
was
60s.
cold the
You
last
don't even
time.
know what a real softball game is out 60s. Come on.
Sounds good.
The right field gate's always unlocked.
Okay.
Or you can text me if it's not, but it
Okay.
should be. Okay.
Sounds great. Thank you.
Awesome. I
Well,
can't
thank you guys.
This was awesome. Really appreciate it.
Thank you.
Thank
Hey,
you.
bring a
everybody.
friend. Everybody's got to bring a friend. It's going to be like compound interest. It's going to get bigger and bigger and bigger and bigger. So
All
Thank
my
you.
friends are on the screen, Coach Nelly. You don't understand. Okay. I haven't.
all mine
actually
are
picked the
too.
first
All
time
my
I
friends
think
are on the
of.
screen too.
And I'm not allowed to go make new ones.
Very true. Very true.
Yeah.
I'll find somebody.
Yeah. We'll make it happen.
Awesome.
All right.
Thank
well,
you guys again.
thank
Have a
y'all
good
so
rest of your
much.
day.
Y'all too now. Nick,
Bye.
Anna, thank you guys. That was really good.